Salvador Jimenez was 47 years old and had a carved face. By the sun and the years on the road, he had more than 2 decades transporting merchandise between Mexico and the United States, and although knew every curve of the route like the palm of your hand, your personal life was a territory a lot further uncertain. Since his wife died in an accident domestic and its son Ernesto walked away after a strong discussion, Salvador had refuge in the cabin of his trailer. I was sleeping there. He ate in nameless stations and avoided all contact that would involve talk more than necessary. There was learned not to feel, not to remember, to look always toward forward, as if something were to chase him. In his world, the silence was less dangerous than nostalgia. Photographs in the glove compartment, they no longer left their about. Calls to the unresponsive son had been turned attempts sporadic, and every time further distant. The route was their punishment and his consolation. That Tuesday, at noon, the Matehuala's heat was falling as lead about he asphalt. Salvador drove without haste, knowing that he would arrive anyway ways to the Monterrey crossing before 10 o'clock at night. It was then when he saw him, a man standing on the side of the road, no hat, no backpack, just a white shirt, open to the wind and some jeans worn out. Didn't lift his thumb as those who ask hitchhiking. I just watched calmly, towards the road, like he knew that someone was going to stop. And Salvador did. He didn't know by what. He didn't even think about it. He just felt something like a stitch in his stomach. The man rose in silence, with a smile calm and a simple "thank you" that echoed further, stronger than 1,000 words. During the first kilometers, they did not speak. Salvador maintained eyes on the road, but I couldn't avoid launch sidelong glances at her companion. He had no backpack, nor cell phone, nor not even he was sweating despite the heat. Suffocating. There was something in he who dislocated, who made uncomfortable and at the same time generated a strange peace. Finally, the man broke his silence with a simple question. "Do you hurts? A lot?" Salvador frowned. He frowned, not understanding. "Your back," he clarified. You feel bent over, like who carries more than the steering wheel." Salvador said, a laughter dry, almost sarcastic, and replied that after 20 years driving, the body complained. But the man denied, gently shook his head and said, "I'm not talking about the body." That phrase made something break by inside. Unintentionally, Salvador stopped a truck and parked on the side. "Who are you?" he asked. The other just looked at him, as if, yeah, that answer did not make lack. In the minutes next, Salvador spoke as I didn't do it does years. He spoke of his wife, how she wasn't at home when she fell down the ladder and hit his head, how Ernesto, his son, blamed him for not being present, how he blamed himself, although pretended otherwise. "I failed too as a father," he murmured. The man who had not yet saying his name, I listened to him without interrupting. When Salvador finished, with red eyes and shaking hands about the steering wheel, the man put a hand on his shoulder and said in a calm voice, "You are not alone." It was then when Salvador blinked, and when he looked back, the man was no longer there. The door continued closed, the empty seat. The only thing left was a wooden cross leaning against the board, engraved in the same phrase, "You are not alone." Snap Part T touched a heart. Subscribe to the channel. We need your support to continue sharing stories. So Salvador stayed still by several minutes, looking at the cross as if it were a sign that I didn't quite understand. There was collected hundreds of people in his path, some grateful, others dangerous, but never there was lived something like that. He felt a mixture of fear and relief, like if something inside it had just broken to make way for something new. That day didn't end his route. He turned off to a small nearby town, parked under some trees and stayed there until the sun went down. That night, for first time in a lot time, slept deeply. The next day, he found the cross about his chest, like yes, someone would have it placed over there while he was asleep. He wasn't scared. Rather, he felt a calm that I did not know. Following days were not equals. Salvador began to notice things I was previously unaware of. The way a child looked at his mother in a gas station, the trembling hands of an old man counting coins to pay for a coffee, the look loss of one young charging a guitar. Broken. He was no longer just a driver. He was an observer. And at one point, without knowing why, what, began to stop. Sometimes to help, to push a car, others to offer a little water or food. One afternoon, Rainey found a woman with her son, little stranded in a dangerous curve. Not only they took it to a mechanic, he stayed with them until the car was ready. Ready. He played with it, child. He listened to the woman talk about her fears, and as they said goodbye, she said to him, "Thank you, sir. You didn't have by what, but he did it." That phrase accompanied him during kilometers, because something inside him was beginning to change, although I didn't know yet as call him. Do you feel that this history deserves reach more people? Then subscribe now and help us continue this path. A week after, in a stop near Zacatecas, Salvador saw a young sitting on the sidewalk, holding a guitar departure in two. I had the stained face by he crying and an old backpack at her feet. He stopped without thinking. He offered her a coffee from the thermos, and they sat down, together in silence. The young woman, whose name was Rocio, told him that she had left home looking for a chance as a street singer, but rain and bad luck had taken his only instrument. Salvador listened without interrupting. When they finished the coffee, asked him to get on the truck. In a village hardware store next, bought glue, tape and some strings, new ones. They spent the afternoon repairing the guitar. It wasn't perfect, but was playing. Rocio played a soft song, and Salvador closed eyes. He felt, in that for a moment, that the world stopped. As they said goodbye, she said to him, "I don't know by that you did this by me, but thank you." He replied without thinking, "Because someone did it by my..." With each meeting, Salvador began to remember fragments of self, same as there was buried. He was no longer alone, the hardened man for the loss. He was beginning to recognize himself in a reflection of others. One night, in a small northern town, while resting under the stars, a boy approached the truck. He didn't speak, just stared at him with big, curious eyes. Salvador got out, knelt down, and offered him a piece of bread. The boy accepted it and gave him a drawing, made with crayons. A truck big, one figure with a hat and a written word awkwardly, "Thank you." When looked up, child had already been gone. That drawing was straight to the board, next to the wooden cross. It was like he world whole started, talking to him in small gestures. It was in the Sierra de San Luis Potosí, where he met Don Matias, an old man with a white beard and deep gaze who lived alone in a wooden cabin among the trees. Salvador had stopped for review a failure in the engine when saw the man sitting on a log, carving figures in wood. Don Matias offered him hibiscus water and they started talking. The conversation flowed as if they had known each other before. They talked about loneliness, about time, about the losses one learns to bear as part of the body. "We all carry something," he said, "but not everything we carry us belongs." That phrase was left hanging around in Salvador's mind as a bell that never stops ringing. Before leaving, Don Matias gave him a small figure carved, a man with a huge backpack on the back, but with a serene smile on the face. After that meeting, Salvador began to write, bought a notebook in a gas station, and each night I wrote down what I had vivid during the day, the faces he had seen, the phrases that had touched, the silences that accompanied him. It wasn't a diary, it was a way of emptying the soul. In those pages, Rocio appeared, the child in the drawing, Don Matias, the woman stranded with her son, and also his wife. He started talking to her in those leaves, to ask him sorry, to tell you what was happening, learning. The notebook became in a shelter, and with each written word, Salvador felt that something in its interior was lightened. It continued driving, yes, but now he did it with another type of load, one more invisible, but infinitely further valuable. As if, without knowing it, I were carrying something that didn't fit in a trailer. One afternoon hot, while crossed a stretch in the arid region of Coahuila, Salvador saw a group of people walking along the side of the road. They were obviously migrants, exhausted, with their feet covered in dust and lips parched. He slowed down and offered them water. A woman with a baby in arms was the first in accept it. He didn't ask for anything else. Just water. Salvador came down further bottles in the compartment rear, gave them canned food and some old blankets he carried for the cold of the heights. Not them he took in a truck, and he knew he couldn't, but he stayed with them until the sunset, talking, listening to their stories. When they said goodbye, the further young man of the group gave him a bracelet, red hand, woven. "So I don't forget," she said. Salvador tied it to his doll. That night, while writing in his notebook, he wrote, "Today I understood that sometimes helping is not solving, but stay, don't pass by." Days later, while delivered a load in Chihuahua, a lady of the town asked him help to carry nails medicines at a rural clinic several hours away. Nobody wanted to go because the road was difficult and they didn't pay a lot. Salvador accepted without thinking in the money. During the journey, crossed unpaved sidewalks, crossed rivers low and high hills steep. When he arrived, they were waiting for him, 3 nurses and a group of mothers with their children in arms. The manager gave him a handshake and a package of warm tortillas as gratitude, nothing more. But seeing as the children received the medicines as were treasures, Salvador felt a peace that no one salary there was accomplished give him. He sat under a tree and ate the tortillas, alone, in silence, with a smile I didn't remember have from toward years. One night, while was resting near a stream in Tamaulipas, Salvador believed see again to the man in the white shirt, Jesus. He was standing a few meters from the truck, watching him in silence. Salvador stood up immediately, but when he approached, it was no longer there. In his place, found a flower, white, nailed on earth. There was no wind, neither signs that someone further had passed by there. He kept the flower between the pages of his notebook, trembling slightly. I felt that something else great that he guided him, even though he didn't know exactly what. That night, he didn't write. He just closed eyes and let the memories will flood him. The laughter of his wife, Ernesto's small steps as a child, dinners with family. He cried without shame, as if finally allowed feel everything there was saved during years. The next day, he took a decision. Upon arriving in Puebla, his hometown, he would leave his truck for a day and would look for to Ernesto. I didn't know. Yeah, his son would receive him. If he would open the door, or if he would hang up on him his phone, I would barely hear it, but I would try. I couldn't anymore continue driving with the heart closed. When arrived, parked in a street acquaintance, walked to her house son and played the bell with sweaty hands. Long seconds passed before a little girl small opened the door. "Are you Salvador?" he asked with a sweet voice. He nodded, unable to speak. The girl, he smiled, showed him a picture of a truck and a man with a hat and said, "My dad told me about you. He says you were good, just sad." Salvador fell to his knees, hugging him, by an emotion that overwhelmed him by complete. Ernesto appeared at the door with eyes full of tears. Father and son stood in silence, looking at each other with a mixture of surprise, pain, and something else older than everything, that unspoken love. Salvador didn't know that say. Ernesto gave the first step, hugged him tightly, and with a broken voice whispered, I waited, although I said no." They came in together to the house. On the table, fresh bread, baked goods, a hot coffee, and another drawing of the girl with the word grandpa written on it in colors alive. They spent the afternoon talking, without rushing. Salvador told him about his travels, about the people he had found, of the man who changed all with one wooden cross. Ernesto, by his part, confessed that many times was about to call him, but pride and pain had him arrested. They forgave each other without saying a word. Reconciliation came with each gesture, a cup served, one hand in his shoulder, one laugh shared. That night, Salvador slept in a bed that didn't move, covered by a granddaughter who left him his teddy bear, "So you don't miss U-Truck, Grandpa." At dawn, before leaving, he said goodbye with a knot in a chest, but with a certainty new, had a home to return to. He hit the road again different. I no longer felt like I was running away from something. Now was driving with another intention. Each stop was an opportunity, every person who found a mirror. In a season in Durango, a young pregnant, I cried alone in a bench. Salvador sat down at his side without asking. He just offered her a handkerchief and a little silence. She told him his history, as if I knew him from always, and when they said goodbye, he said to her, "You made me feel seen," as if mattered. Those words stayed with him for days. More than gasoline, what moved him now were meetings. So, a few days later, while driving towards Hermosillo, Salvador saw a dog old in the middle of the road, limping and clearly disoriented. He stopped her truck suddenly. He got out carefully and approached. The animal looked at him without a fear, as if there were state waiting. I had he fur dirty and a earfall, but wagged his tail with a hope silent. Salvador lifted him into the truck, gave him water and a little ham that I kept in the cooler. He called it coffee, because the color of your fur. Since then, coffee became in his traveling companion. I was sleeping in the passenger seat, stuck his head out the window, and somehow seemed to understand each Salvador's silence. With him, the nights stopped being so long. The truck. It was no longer a space of solitude, but of company. With coffee at your side, Salvador began to stop further followed, not only by need or by help, but by to be. In a small town in Sonora, he helped repair the local school whose windows had been broken by a storm. He didn't do it alone. He joined the parents of the children and worked together for 2 days. In return, the children gave him a necklace made of colorful buttons. Salvador hung it in a rearview mirror next to the wooden cross and the bracelet read. The truck was beginning to look less like a cargo vehicle and more like a rolling altar filled with symbols and memories. Each object hanging had a history, each history a face, each face a teaching. And he, without seeking it, had converted in a witness of the invisible, those small acts of humanity that rarely appear in the maps, but they transform his path. One afternoon, when stopping in a rural store to buy water, an older woman recognized him. "You're the one in the trailer with the dog and stuff. Hanging, right?" Salvador smiled, nodding shyly. The woman asked him, "Yeah, could take a package of groceries to your sister, sick woman who lived in a ranch, isolated." She accepted without hesitation. The road was complicated, but she knew it well. When she arrived, she was welcomed with hugs, warm tortillas, and a lit candle about a shelf. The woman's sister offered her a coffee and told her that her husband there was been truck driver too. They carry more than cargo, he said. They carry hope when decide look. That phrase was left floating in the air as Salvador walked away, feeling that somehow that women there was described exactly what I didn't know, yet put in words. By continuing his route, began to meet other people who recognized him, not because his name, but by your gestures. "You was the one who helped my cousin with the tire," said one. "The gentleman who brought medicines to the mountains," he said another. Salvador never looked for recognition, but see that their actions, small they left, made a mark on him understand something deep. There was started to belong to the places by those who passed by. He was no longer a stranger. He was part of the path. In a gas station, a child approached him and gave him a gift, a lit candle inside a jar, "So that it doesn't go out, you kindness," he told her. Salvador placed her carefully in her board next to the others' memories, and that night, when writing in his notebook, put only one phrase. "Today I realize that I don't drive goods. I drive stories that transform me." One morning, while was driving for a stretch, mountainous wrapped in fog, the truck's engine began to fail. It had to stop in the middle of a curve without a signal and without the possibility of ordering help. Coffee moaned softly, like if he also felt the tension of the day. moment. Salvador went down, checked what he could with the tools he was carrying, but he couldn't turn it on again. Hours passed. No one passed by along that path to that hour. Then he saw a light between the trees, a flashlight. He approached cautiously and found a young man in a ranger's uniform. "I saw the lights of his truck from the viewpoint," he explained. Together they reviewed the engine. They found he failed and succeeded start it. Before leaving, the young man told him, "Now sometimes we are not us who we found he path, but who are found." Salvador offered him coffee from the thermos, and they smiled without saying a lot further. After that incident, Salvador became further aware of the moments in which I needed help. Always there was state of the giving side, but now was beginning to accept that it was also valid receive. In a town near the border, a woman invited him to dinner after seeing it sharing food with some day laborers. She was a widow, with a daughter teenager and a little one dining room community that supported with much effort. That night, Salvador heard more than he spoke. He left serve, he left take care. For the first time in a lot time, he did not feel guilty about it, to rest. When saying goodbye, the woman gave him a gift, a napkin embroidered with the word trust. He placed it in the cabin, right above the mirror, and during his return journey, every time I saw her, I remembered that even the further strong need stop, let go, embrace for life, and continue forward with less weight. In another occasion, crossing by in a desert area south of Baja, California, Salvador found a man lying next to his bicycle, unconscious by heat. Without thinking, he put him in the truck, hydrated him, and took him to the health center further close. The cyclist was called Martin, and he was a traveler lonely that walked he country by reasons that hardly he managed to count. When he recovered, Salvador accompanied him for a whole day, carrying it part of the way. They shared stories, laughter, and even a song with the guitar that Rocio had played for him left months before. As they said goodbye, Martin gave him a small notebook with cover worn out. "Here I write down the places that teach me something. This one's yours, now." Salvador flipped through the pages and found phrases, drawings, names, and coordinates. A travel diary. He kept it next to his own notebook, like if both shared now the same destination. With the time, the Salvador's truck became in legend among villages and rural roads. Some called him the trailer of the miracle, others the man of the cross. Salvador did not understand well why, what, but he didn't correct it. I knew I wasn't doing it miracles. I just chose not to look elsewhere side. Every gesture, every aid offered, it was more for him than for the others. It was his way of rebuilding himself. Sometimes, at night, he thought to see Jesus again among the people. An old man in a bank, a woman charging firewood, a young man sleeping under a bridge, and although I was no longer looking answers, yes, understood a thing. Each meeting was a spark that lit something in its interior, and that light, that warmth that drove him to continue, no longer came from the diesel or the engine. It came from the soul. If you are feeling something while reading this, don't ignore it. Subscribing is a way of saying, I want more of this in my life. One morning, while passing through a coastal town, Salvador noticed a commotion near a school. A pipe rattan there was left the staff without water, and the children could not attend classes. Without anyone asking him, he looked for a deposit, filled his auxiliary tank and offered it to the director to supply the bathrooms and drinking fountains. The afternoon passed. There, among buckets, laughter, children's and thanks sincere. A teacher gave her a paper folded as he said goodbye. Upon opening it, Salvador found a phrase handwritten by the children. "Thank you for not passing by." That paper was taped on the inner door of the truck, and every time I opened it, I read it as a reminder of who he was now. Not a hero, not a savior, but someone who had elected stop. As the months go by, the route stopped being a line between origin and destination, and became in a fabric of faces, voices and gestures that Salvador treasured. Each stop was a history, each history a transformation. In Oaxaca, he helped a midwife to transfer a woman in labor. In Chiapas, she carried books at a time library improvised. In Guerrero, he rescued a trapped family in a river flood. They were not acts planned. They were natural responses to moments that presented themselves as opportunities for connection. And meanwhile, your notebook was filled, I know. Longer wrote just for the sake of it. Relief. I wrote to remember, to be thankful, to not forget what mattered. Coffee, his faithful companion, followed his side, also getting older, but with the bright eyes of someone who has lived a lot more than expected. And Salvador, without saying it in voice high, I knew that life, the one that now had, wouldn't have found if it weren't for that first meeting in Matehuala. One night crashed, parked near a field of sunflowers. Salvador felt something inside him asking him, stop by complete. It wasn't tiredness physical, but a need to look toward back and see he path tour. He got off the truck, extended a blanket, and lay down in hay floor with coffee nestled next to him. He looked at the sky for a long time, letting the breeze warm caressed him the face. He thought in his wife, in Ernesto, in his granddaughter, in every face that had crossed his life in those months. He felt gratitude, not for what there was lost, but for what there was found in the process of giving. It was then when he saw Jesus again, or so believed. He appeared among the sunflowers, standing with a flashlight in the hand and the same serene smile. He said nothing. He just looked at him and nodded, softly, and disappeared. Salvador didn't chase him. He didn't need to. He understood that Jesus, whoever he was, wasn't an external appearance, but a reflection of what he there was, awakened in its interior. The wooden cross continued. In his board, the bracelet red in his doll, the button necklace, the flower white, the candle in his bottle, the child's drawing. Each object was a compass that kept him en route, even when I didn't know exactly toward where I was going. But it didn't matter anymore. Destiny. What mattered was the how. Upon returning to Puebla for a new visit, was welcomed with a surprise party. Ernesto, his daughter-in-law, her granddaughter, and even some neighbors were waiting for him with signs handmade. Welcome home, Salvador. That phrase broke him, because finally understood that there was stopped running. Now I walked, I advanced, accompanied by each story that there was elected embrace. During his stay in Puebla, Salvador did something that was postponing from toward years. Visited the grave of his wife. He brought flowers, cleaned the tombstone carefully, and sat down next to she in silence. He didn't cry this time. He spoke in low voice, telling him everything. There was lived, the faces that had it marked, the lessons that there were learned. I was not he best father, nor he better husband, she said, but I am trying to be better human. He left the flower white that there was saved from that early morning in he path, the same one he found where believed see Jesus. He stayed there until evening fell. When he got up, he felt further light, as if his pain will no longer crush him, but will walk beside him. Transformed. Before going back out on the road, Salvador made a copy of your notebook and gave it to him to Ernesto. In case one day you want to understand by why I left and why that I'm back, he said. Ernesto hugged him without speaking. He also gave him something, a keychain with a photo of your granddaughter, laughing, with the word brave written on it in the reverse. Salvador hung it next to the truck keys. That word stayed with him during all the new route, because he understood that courage was not about facing the external, but have he courage to look toward inside, recognize the errors, ask forgiveness, and offering love without expecting anything in return. By resuming the steering wheel, it was felt in peace. Not because all was solved, but because there was learned to live with the questions. And in each stop that I made, I no longer looked for signs. I recognized them, as if always would have stayed there, waiting for him learn to look with different eyes. At a crossroads dusty near Jalisco, Salvador met to Ana, One young man who worked in a cafeteria. It had an air melancholic, but a smile generous. For several days they crossed paths by chance, or maybe not so much, and they began to share short chats over 6 o'clock coffee. One day, she confessed to him that he had recently lost his father, and seeing Salvador arrive with his truck each late reminded him that not everything had been gone. "You make me believe that there are still good men," he told her. That phrase, although simple, it came to him deep, because by a lot time, he didn't consider himself a good man. It was with Anna that he understood that one doesn't need to be perfect to be good. One just has to be willing to be there for him other. Before continuing path, Salvador left a letter to Anna, written in handwriting, trembling but clara. She thanked him. By coffees, words and humanity shared. He also left a wooden figure carved, that there was received from Don Matias, the old man of the forest. "So you don't forget that kindness never fades," the note said. Anna, upon finding it, wept in silence. Meanwhile, Salvador returned to the road, feeling that every act of giving left a seed, even if it could not stay and watch ye flourished. His route took him toward the south, by paths that never there was traveled, and each new town offered him a different face, a history new, one chance more to choose from the good. He no longer scored all the days in the notebook. Now he only wrote when something really shook him, and that filter taught him something new, that not everything I had to keep, only what you had power to transform. One night, rainy, in a town in Michoacan, Salvador decided sleep in a small pension in place to stay in a truck. The owner of the place, an older woman named Carmen, offered him hot soup and a thick blanket. Seeing the objects hanging in his backpack, the cross, the drawing, the bracelet, he asked her if he was a believer. Salvador hesitated. "I believe in what can be touched, as far as possible feel, even if it is not always seen," he replied. Carmen nodded and showed him an altar she had in a corner of the dining room. It wasn't there full of saints nor virgins, but of objects, a letter from his daughter, a little shoe of hers grandson, a stone that he gave her his deceased husband. "Each one is a proof that I was there, beloved," he said. That night, Salvador understood that everyone carried their own altars, visible or not. His eye was traveling about wheels. The next day, before leaving, Carmen gave him a small package, wrapped in paper newspaper. It was a small one-clay angel, made by she, "So that you take care, although I think you are the one who cares to others," he told him. Salvador accepted it with a smile, gently placing it next to the other's memories of your cabin. While was driving under the darling, still cloudy, it felt deeply accompanied, not only by coffee, his faithful dog asleep in the seat, but by all those faces, hands and words that had been gone staying with him. "I didn't have a plan. I didn't follow an agenda. I just let the path will guide you." And in each crossing, in every forgotten town by the maps, Salvador left something of himself, and he took something with him too. He was no longer the same. I hadn't noticed day by day, but now, when you look in the rearview mirror, I saw a man who had felt again. In a stretch coastal Nayarit, Salvador was witness of an accident. A car had dumped near a dangerous curve. Without thinking, he parked his truck, grabbed his first aid kit and ran toward the place. Inside, a young couple I was trying go out through the window broken. With the help of others drivers who stopped, managed to rescue them and stabilize them until the ambulance arrived. And while they were waiting, the young wounded asked him his name. "Salvador," he replied. The boy smiled weakly. "Sure I do. Like who saves?" That coincidence of words left him in silence, not for pride, but because by first time understood the weight and the sense that could have his name. Maybe never there was state destined to save everyone, but yeah, to be there when someone I needed it the most. And that presence in same could be enough. That night already. Far from the scene of the accident, Salvador stopped at the seaside. The sound of the waves, the wind salty, and the immensity of the horizon offered him a moment of introspection. He thought in his path, in everything there was delivered, and in what is still was left by to go through. He wondered, yeah, someday I would see Jesus again. If really was the appearance divine or a projection of your awareness broken, but I no longer needed the answer, because what that encounter there was, provoked was real. It changed his life. It brought him out of the lethargy, out of the pilot automatic. He did it look toward he world with compassion, and he understood that such time Jesus had not disappeared that time in Matehuala. Only there was left purposeful beating within it, guiding every step without saying a word. Weeks later, into stop in one community indigenous in Sinaloa, Salvador was invited to participate in a little local ceremony. He had taken food and supplies, put indication of a teacher I had met in one previous stop. On the wheel, toward around the fire, heard stories old, corners in languages that he no understood, but that touched something deep inside me. An old woman came up and put her hand on him, in his chest, and said something that a young translated, "You carries light in hands. Wherever he touches, something changes." Salvador does not. I knew what to answer. I just lowered his head, moved. That phrase stayed with him during a long time ago. Already it wasn't just the truck that transported things precious. He was. And understand this, accept this made him walk further light, with more sense, with more careful. Some days then, to the enter a town devastated put floods. Salvador saw children joking in the middle of the mud, improvising a ball with socks old women. He stopped the truck, got out, and suddenly started playing with them. He laughed like he hadn't laughed in a long time. He got his clothes dirty, hurt his knee, but he was a kid again, put half an hour. In the end, it was a new ball that he brought among the loads, a gift that he had bought months before, without knowing who it would be for. The children. They shouted, jumped, thanked him. One of them hugged him and said, "You're the guy from my heart." That broke him. He had been a father, now he was a grandfather, but never. There was been uncle of the heart. That innocence, that simple joy, rekindled something forgotten in it. The pleasure of affection free from the present spontaneous. And in silence, there he even decided that he would continue in what mission invisible, no put obligation. But because love, when vivid in movement, creates roots until in it roads. One morning at a gas station already almost in it, border with Guatemala, Salvador found a child sitting on the floor with his head low and a misspelled sign that said, "I'm not bad, I just have hunger." Without hesitation, Salvador bought 2 dishes made in the restaurant toward beside him and sat with him on the floor, sharing the food. The young man's name was Damien. He left home afterwards one fight with him parents, and not I had a place where go. They spoke put almost an hour, without hurry up, no trial. Finally, Salvador pulled a note from his pocket. Older than him own there was written for you. Years long ago, when he felt lost. He handed it to Damien and said, "Keep this, it will come back one day," in which you go to understand each word. The child read in silence, and, with the eyes tearful, alone, he replied, "Thank you for not dying." The phrase, repeated so many times, now resonated like a mantra. In what same day, before continuing trip, Savior felt I need to stop and walk a bit. Parked in one path, secondary school, and entered a small, guided forest section just for the desire to breathe another air. Halfway there, he found one tree fallen with a registration engraved on the trunk. He who helps without being will be, is seen by he heart. That paralyzed him. It seemed made for him. No, there was signs that someone had been there, for a long time. Salvador sat toward side of the tree and stayed there for hours, without think, just feeling. The sound of the branches, the wind through the leaves, the smell of damp earth. It was like a hug, silence of life, and saying, "You this exactly where ought to be." And when returned toward truck, with the eyes still shining, I felt like I wasn't doing it. I didn't waste any time. I found it for you, same. In the following weeks, Salvador decided reduce his long trips. It started he accept fair routes places between towns and small cities, as if sensing that time now required a different rhythm. He used his free time to visit people who had acquaintance in previous rounds, returned to school where donated water. I took a new set of tools to the mechanic who helped with the mother and son, took strings, new things for Rocio's guitar. Each meeting was a celebration. Silent, I realized, us people's eyes, the impact duration of the small one's gestures that nourished him. No, there was money, fame, or the position he held that he had been given before what he now found in each hug received, in each look. What it said, he came back. On one of these visits, he returned to the home of Doña Carmen, the woman from the boarding house with the altar of memories. He brought a gift, a wooden frame that he same there was carved with the name of his granddaughter, whom he had met in it first stay. Carmen cried, "Toward, receive it. Nobody never he remembered me." "So," said Salvador just. He smiled, not knowing how to respond. He realized. So that was becoming part of other people's stories. So like so many had entered in it hers. As she left, him. He handed over an envelope with a handwritten letter and a little stone. Brilliant. I remember when I felt strong. Now it's yours, he said. Salvador kept the stone. In it, panel shelf, to the side of the candle in the jar and the clay doll. And when started the engine to continue journey, I felt that each kilometer traveled was also a chapter of a book that he never planned write. But that, even so, it was lived with the truth. During a fair community in El Salvador, a small town in Veracruz, was invited to tell his stories. In the beginning rejected, never found good with words, but one young teacher, he insisted. Sometimes, counting is another way of caring, she said. She climbed onto the little one, scenery improvised, and in front of dozens of people session in plastic chairs, he spoke simply. No in miracles, either wandering's great, but about meeting people, listening pains, offer aid, no questions asked. When you're done, no one will. They immediately applauded. There was silence, dense, full of emotion. So a lady stood up and hugged him. Then one child, after the whole line. Salvador came off the stage crying, us eyes carrying, it is not a trophy but a new symbol, a tape blue tied to the arm, given by a girl who said, so that you can continue be lighthouse in what same night. Walking through the fair already almost empty, Salvador saw a child's sale bracelets, purchased 3, without negotiate. The boy, he thanked him and said, you are the same, to my father, only him still, not found. These words remained hammering in his head. He thought in how many men they were put there, empty of themselves. Same, driving his lives without address. Himself already was one of them, and now, even not knowing how to explain had become guide without wanting to be. A teacher-ed light without wanting to be a star. When he got back to the truck, he looked at each one. Object arrested toward panel. Each of them was I vividly remember that he had change. Put willing own. Changed because heard, because gave in. Because, in a moment of desperation, he allowed someone him showed a new path, that man serene in it path, which was perhaps only a reflection of what could become. On another trip, to the cross, put one region mountainous. In Hidalgo, Salvador saw a group of women charging buckets of water along a path steep. They were exhausted, sweaty, but they continued. In silence, he stopped the truck, got out and offered help. Carefully, he filled his auxiliary tank and manufactured several trips to make water to the people. At the end of the day, he sat down with them, toward around one bonfire improvised, with few words and many smiles, shared corn roast and stories old. One of the women, the oldest older, woman gave birth he a hand, painted shell, to remember that there is strength until in it hands further tired. Salvador put it in his pocket and didn't say anything. But to inside, something settled. He did what he did to forgive himself. He did it because I deeply understood that caring for others was also take care of what is broken inside of him. As the days passed, he realized that his presence provoked changes, subtle US places, put where a child was. Passing by return, he studied after winning notebooks. An older man began to receive visits for a conversation they had on a park bench. A group of young people organized a collection of foods inspired in his stories. None of this was planned. He passed, he listened, he helped, and he continued. But the difference he was made. Each action, Salvador felt that he did not do it. He was fair walking through Mexico, was redesign his own soul. Coffee, your loyal dog, now walked. More slowness, and Salvador knew that his time was too much. He was arriving. I took care of him with patience, affection, and the same respect that he learned he offered toward people. After all, that puppy, he was the first to give it to him, do company without asking for anything, and that in for him had immeasurable value. When the coffee finally left, in a tomorrow cold in San Cristobal de las Casas, Salvador buried him with his family, hands in a quiet field, under a tree. Great. I made one. Cross simple with 2 branches and left toward next to it the bracelet, a red one that he was wearing since the meeting with the migrants. He cried as no cry since the death of his wife. But this time, no. There was no guilt, only longing and gratitude. He sat down, graveside for hours, remembering the trips, the looks, exchanged from silence shared. The coffee was state, very more than a dog. It had been presence, comfort, company. And at that moment, Salvador understood that some losses already, no, they came to harm, but to teach us to honor the love that was. He lived. When he returned to the truck, he didn't feel anything, empty. It felt complete, as if a part of you had found rest. In the days following, I felt the absence of friend in each curve, in each arrest, silent. But he decided he would continue. No put obligation, but because I knew that still there was much to give. In a town in it, border with Belize, helped build a small women's shelter in risky situation. In another, he took a lady at the hospital more, near him with a high fever. At all times, he noticed something curious. People called him for him name before even introducing himself. You're Salvador, right? He smiled, not knowing how that spread. But I understood that the story's path put account on, loaded put those who had state touched in some way. And that him, enough is enough. No, necessary don't. Try anything. No, I didn't expect anything in exchange. Only followed, guided with a purpose, silent, motorized, put each gesture that planted seeds in the hearts of others. One day, in one community, far from the interior of Tabasco, the boy approached him while he supplied water in a well collective. It had a button in its hand and said, "My grandfather sent you give. That's what you said. I would know what it meant." Salvador smiled, moved by the simplicity of the gesture. He remembered the necklace of buttons he had received from the students at the rural school months before. He carefully put the button in his shirt pocket, like WHO, carry one secret message. When was it? Towards the child's grandfather. You, he said, only. You already stopped being a visitor. Now he is part of us. That was echoing in it for the rest of the day. The idea of belonging, something that means a lot to you. It was missing during years. Now appeared us places further unlikely. And Salvador, who always saw himself as passenger, was now recognized as someone who remains, even when part. At the end of a late rainy, while wrote in your new notebook, Salvador gave himself story of something simple but profound. Everything that had vivid from that the encounter with Jesus in Matehuala took place. It's been a calling, not a calling to change the world, but a calling to change yourself, even, and by consequence, touch the world toward his around. None of the stories I collected there was state magnificent, either spectacular, but everything they had something in common. the choice to be present, and that, you understand, he is what transforms, not the miracle, nor the gesture, heroic, but the decision not to do it pass. He looked at the empty bench where Cafe once slept, touched the steering wheel reverently, and whispered, "We're leaving, friend." Because, even without words, even alone, Salvador knew that something inside him continued, in movement, and that mission still, no, there was finished. In one of his latest stops before returning to Puebla, Salvador passed for a people where celebrated the feast of the patron saints, the square. He was decorated with flags, colorful, children running between food stalls, and a group of elderly people, playing guitar and accordion. When I realized his arrival, one woman called out to him, "Hey, Mr. Salvador, you arrived on time." Confused, he approached, and she explained that they had maintained a place of honor at the common table for him. Someone said his stories. Now you too, he does it part of ours. He sat among strangers who seemed old friends. They ate, they laughed, they sang, together. And in good moment, someone stuck one flower white behind you ear, the same flower that they had found years before in the field, side of Jesus's appearance. It was as if the path whole had come full circle, as if I were back in the starting point, but transformed. Back in Puebla, Salvador loaded the truck. Some few burdens, but in the heart brought very more. It brought letters, souvenirs, notes, simple objects full of meaning. When I arrived, I was straight to Ernesto's house. His granddaughter was waiting for him at the door with a sign, handwritten, "Welcome, grandfather of the heart." He cried, of course, but now they were tears, sweet, full of presence. In the following days, she helped her son with small repair in the house. He said bedtime stories for her granddaughter and, for the first time, accepted that he deserved it. Stay already. He wasn't just the man of the road, he was also the man of the home. Yet so, after some days, trapped his backpack and said he needed to go back. For a short while, he said, there are people out there waiting someone to stop and listen. Ernesto understood. The path called, but now he knew his father would always come back. On the new trip, Salvador spent he walk without hurry up, stopped, same without reason, just to see the sunset, feel the wind on your face, either hear the sound of a square full. Already, no transported hurry up, don't feel guilty, just presence. In a small city in it, mountains of Oaxaca, helped a young man who dreamed in being a carpenter, assembling his first workshop. He donated tools he had saved from deliveries old and past 2 days. There, teaching what little he knew about wood and listening. Before leaving, the boy, you gave a ring made of nails folded. For remember that even what was discarded, he can spin protection. Salvador smiled, put the ring on his finger, and felt that, more one time, there was received more than what he had offered. Because every time I stopped to help, it really touched me. It was him. One day, passing by, put one path that does not took there is years. See one figure stopped on the shoulder. The heart accelerated. I couldn't see the face clearly, but there was something familiar about posture in calm down. He stopped the truck, got out, and there was Jesus, or someone he looked like him. He was wearing white, smiles serenely, and more one time, he said nothing. Salvador walked until he put his hand on the stranger's shoulder and said, "Thank you." "No, I didn't ask anything." "No." He requested explanations, only stayed there by long minutes in silence. And when blinked, the figure had disappeared. In his place, a wooden cross stuck in the ground, just like the first one, but with a new message: keep sowing. Salvador carefully picked it up, placed it on the passenger seat, and with his heart pulsating as in it first time, came back behind the wheel. I knew that it wasn't the end of the road. It was just another new beginning. The following months they were vivid as one soft crossing. Salvador now with hair, further grey, and the steps slower, followed by the one who stopped. the one who listened, the one who offered aid without ask. It was known in dozens of towns, from north to south. They called him the Good Walker, the grandfather of the road, the friend of the people. But I was looking for titles. His greatest present was the look moved by someone who felt seen. With each new story, he wrote less in it notebook, no put I forgot, but because now everything he was bran in it, in the skin, wee eyes, in the living memory of those who allow themselves feel, and at every goodbye, he always said the same thing. Phrase, see you in he path, because in fact believed in this, that everyone were in some way path, in same road, even if it is in instructions different. Did you get this far? Then make it worthwhile, subscribe, comment, and share this history with someone who needs it. During a delivery in a town by the river, Salvador was invited to baptize a child newborn. The country had lost the child's grandfather days before, and they said that the baby ought to bear the name of someone who carried light. Savior, they said. He hesitated, thinking he was not worthy, but to the family's excitement, he accepted. On the day of the christening, he held the baby in his arms, and cried in silence. For the first time. Over time, he felt that something of himself, would do it when he deceased. Something more than memories, something alive. By returning the child to the parents said, just take care of those who are close. That's the way, the purest thing to do, the good. And he continued, with his heart in peace, because understood more than ever that the true mission never fix the world, but touch it gently with love. One day, at cross a known mountainous section put fog intense, Salvador spotted a group of young people trying push a broken down pickup truck. He got out of the truck, helped in every way he could, gave tools, a flashlight, and even sandwiches. After solving the problem, one of the boys he asked, "You always help all world, so?" And Salvador answered, with a smile loose, "I didn't always help. But one day someone helped me, and since then, so I'm not the same anymore." Youths they took a picture with him, laughed, thanked him, and before leaving, they left him a note, stuck on the truck's rearview mirror. "Thanks for exist." Salvador maintained that paper carefully. Even with so many gestures anonymous, it was comforting to know that your presence did difference. And there, on that curve of the mountain, he felt part of a current invisible, where each act of kindness resonated for a long time beyond what could be seen. Back on the road, Salvador had one idea that never there was considered. Detained in one roadside internet cafe, pay as you go, put an hour, and began to write. He gathered stories, remembered names, moments, symbols. He created a small blog called Don't Pass By, where wrote everything that came living, without claim, without photos yours, only texts sincere. Little by little, messages, they started arriving. People who had met him, others who had only, I had read it, and it moved me. People, they said, that because of their words, had stopped to help someone, spoke to a neighbor and called a distant father. Salvador didn't care about tastes, either numbers. What mattered was knowing that this transformation silent continued forward, that the miracle, if there ever was one, was event, no in it, but in all who chose to care. In a little city in the interior of Morelos, Salvador was invited to participate in a meeting in behavior solidarity. No sought speak on stage, but stay sitting between the participants, listening carefully each report. In the end, a teenager came up and said he had read your blog. My dad was depressed, without work, without will to live. I showed his texts for now he this helping renovate the neighborhood square. He says he wants to be like. Salvador was moved, thanked him and offered him a hug, tight. It was there he realized that his words had life own, which already know. They needed him to follow them, transforming people. It was like have planted trees in land distant. I would see all bloom, but I knew they were growing, and the thought filled him with peace. Some days then, returning to a route known, Salvador saw, beside the road, a new wooden cross. He stopped, got out, and approached. It was embedded in the solid ground with letters carving that said, "Here someone elected stay." He smiled. He didn't know who there was left but he got the message. It wasn't about death. It was about presence, about decision, that the phrase was a mirror of what he owned vineyard living there is years. Choose stay, choose stop, choose to see. Salvador sat down, there, the same, facing the cross, and he remained there for a long time. Silence, looking at the horizon. The wind, the leaves swayed, and the sky began to change color as the afternoon progressed. There was no need to do anything, just to be. And at that moment, he understood that even if his journey ended there, something of him would remain, in the hands that helped, in the stories he told, and in the lives you touched without perceive. In the penultimate arrest about that season, Salvador found one old friend of yours wife at a street market. She recognized him immediately and hugged him excitedly. She would be then, "I'm proud of you," she said. They talked for hours, remembering moments from the past and sharing the changes of the present. Salvador spoke about Ernesto, his granddaughter, the people he met, and the path he transformed. Her friend delivered a small wooden box with a letter that your wife there was written before he died, but never arrive he send. In the letter, there was one only phrase that Salvador never I heard. You always had a heart well, just necessary learn. He listened to it. When he finished reading, he cried, in silence, feeling as if that cycle finally was complete. Already no, there was hurt, nor, and doubt. There was love, only love. At dusk, Salvador decided sleep there the same, to the side of the truck, under the sky, starry, with the cross of, "Here someone chosen to stay," stuck on the ground side. He made her a simple coffee and smiled. He took his notebook, wrote some latest words, and then carefully closed it. "No, I felt like I was finished something, but only turning further one page. The path I still called him, but less frequently now. Urgency. If I decided to stop completely, would be in peace. If you decided follow also, because had become complete. Already it was not the man wounded for years. Behind, neither the absent father, nor the truck driver invisible. He was the savior, the one who one day he chose stop, listen and pay attention, and this choice there was change all. No, not only for him, but for everyone who crossed his path. Days later, back in Puebla, Salvador was welcomed with dinner simple at Ernesto's house, hot food, laughter, and his granddaughter's drawings, pendant in it wall. He sat at the table with his family, like no did there is decades. When the granddaughter he asked if he was still the grandfather of the roads. He smiled and replied, "Now I'm the returning grandfather." Everyone laughed, but they knew he had true in what prayer, because for the first time, Savior, no transported, I was in a hurry to leave. I was there, present, whole, and in that hug collective before sleeping, he felt that maybe, finally, he had found your home, not a place fixed, but the space where love was stronger than longing. On the day next, it was to the garage where left his truck, cleaned each detail, organized you objects on the panel, the cross, the flower white, the bracelet red, the button necklace, the nail ring, the candle in the jar, the Carmen stone. Each item had his place, but for the first time you looked no as memories of pain, either redemption, but how? Symbols of a life that there was decided to be light. He stood up. In it, cabin, started the engine and felt the familiar vibration. He looked for him mirror, and in its place where the cafe used to be sleeping, there was a folded blanket with your name embroidery, a gift from a group of children. She smiled tenderly and said, in voice, "Stop. We keep going, my friend. We always keep going." And so, Salvador returned to the path, no further as escape, nor as mission, but how? Choice. Because now I knew that every curve, every face, each one, the gesture was part of something bigger. And because I understood, finally, that the true miracles, no wine from heaven, wine from all time, someone chose no come in. It's over. No as hero, but how? Man. A man who learned, in the silence of the path, that compassion he can transform destinations, including yours. Thanks for joining us until the end. If you want this channel to continue existing, your subscription is essential. Do it now and help us continue touching souls.